Hello everyone, welcome back to Brian's Mysteries and Adventures on Trail. I hope everyone is doing well. If you haven't subscribed, please consider subscribing. It really helps out the channel a lot. My work with search and rescue, research, helping other teams out. Today we are going to be talking about a case that I started the story in a previous video, which I'll have a link to in the description. For some of you, part of this will be a review. The best way I figured to do this video was to tell the story from the starting point of how these two met on the trail, what happened, how they got separated, and how Andrew Stitch ended up disappearing. The backstory on how these two ended up being on the Appalachian Trail at the very same time, at the same spot, is very interesting and definitely scary too. So if you want to hear that, please check out the link in the description. In today's video, we will be discussing how these two were hiking part of the Appalachian Trail, more specifically in Pennsylvania. Andrew, the young man, disappeared. This case takes us all the way back to 2003 in late September. A young man by the name of Andrew, trail name Stitch. He got this name because he was very good at making his own gear, repairing gear, that kind of thing. He had set out on the Appalachian Trail. The Appalachian Trail is a national scenic trail here in the United States, starting at Springer Mountain in the state of Georgia, going all the way up to the state of Maine, ending at Mount Katahdin. It is 2,194 miles in total length. This case takes place in the northeastern parts of the trail in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, as well as New York. This case is unique to my channel. It was shared specifically with me by a park ranger named Anie, who I'd been communicating with over the last couple of years. Sadly, she recently passed away due to cancer earlier this year. She really wanted me to share this story with everyone. She really was trying to hopefully track down her hiking partner. Sadly, though, she never did find out what happened to him. During the time this case happened, Anie was a young woman. She had just joined the Park Service, had gone through training. She was taking several weeks off to do some of her own hiking on the Appalachian Trail. Andrew was a young man in his early 20s. He was very goal-oriented. He had completed certain sections of the trail. He had not finished it. He wanted to ultimately complete the entire Appalachian Trail. He knew going back to the Appalachian Trail in late September was a gamble. Nonetheless, his mind was made up. So like Anie, he set out in late September of 2003 on the Appalachian Trail in northeastern Pennsylvania. The pair met on the second evening of their hike. Anie came along and saw Stitch's campfire. She came up, introduced herself, asked him what his plans were, how much hiking he had done. Andrew explained that this was only his second day out. He had done sections of the trail before. He was hoping to get at least up through New York. Andrew offered Anie some tea. The two struck up a conversation. Anie told Andrew that she had just started as well. They both found it very serendipitous that they were both on the second day of their hikes. Anie told him about her new job, that she was thrilled to have it, but she was shy because she wasn't that experienced with hiking. She loved the outdoors and she did have a lot of skills, but she wanted to improve on her hiking skills, and that was her main catalyst for coming out for this hike. They talked into the night, camped that night together. The next morning, they decided that they would hike together. Andrew was a much faster hiker. Anie initially tried keeping pace with Andrew on that first day, but then after talking, Andrew said, "Don't try and outdo yourself, just take your time." They decided that they would pick certain waypoints for lunch, dinner, then their camp spot. Anie was usually within a couple hundred yards of Andrew. Nothing too remarkable happened on the first couple days and nights, aside the fact that they both noticed that the leaves were changing very rapidly and the temperatures were also getting very cold. They continued to get to know each other. They were both very into photography and had brought their own cameras. Andrew had remarked on Annie's camera because it was a much nicer model. However, Anie said that it was just a loaner from one of her new friends at the Parks Department. That evening, they found a wonderful place to camp, got their campfire started. At one point, Anie stepped aside to use the restroom. She looked up and she thought she saw a UFO. She was so taken by it, she went over to get Andrew, but by the time they came back, it was gone, so she just wrote it off as probably a shooting star. The next night, after a great day of hiking, they were roughly 12 miles away from where they were the previous night, had a good campsite set up. This time, they both saw what looked like a UFO. This is what they saw in the night sky. Looked like a saucer shape, but had sort of a tail and what they described as contrails. They knew it wasn't a cloud or anything like that. It was moving too fast. It mesmerized both of them. They said their hairs on the back of their necks stood up. They stayed up all night stargazing and talking about UFOs and things like that. They fell asleep in mystery that evening and woke up to even more when there was a small amount of snow that had fallen. This was both shocking and worrisome to the pair because neither of them really had appropriate gear for winter or colder temperatures. They decided to move forward anyway. They continued hiking north. The snow continued on throughout the afternoon. Keep in mind, this is 2003, so they didn't have smartphones, and of the two of them, Andrew was the only one that had a cell phone with him, and it wasn't getting any reception. That day, they passed their first lean-to, which are very common along the Appalachian Trail, some in better shape than others. They both remarked at how nice this one was. Then they also realized that they hadn't seen any other hikers or campers for the entire time that they had been hiking together. This didn't bother the pair, they just found it a little strange. That night, they set up camp as usual. This time, they saw something even more bizarre in the night sky, what looked like a spinning Christmas tree. Annie couldn't believe it because, as she told Andrew, her parents had told her a story when she was young that in the late 70s, people reported seeing something that looked like a spinning Christmas tree in the night skies of northeastern Pennsylvania. The next morning, they woke up to a big amount of snow, at least 5 or 6 inches. They couldn't believe it. They couldn't believe that it seemed like overnight all the leaves had fallen from the trees. At this point, Annie was getting a little apprehensive, but none of it seemed to faze Andrew, and she didn't want to say anything, especially since she was so excited about her new job as a ranger. She didn't want to seem like she was too inexperienced. That night, the pair stumbled on what they thought was an abandoned, established campground because they found a bunch of these fire rings that you find in established campgrounds. They decided to camp there for the night. They discussed whether or not they should keep going north. That night, they had very deep conversations about their past, childhood memories, future dreams. Annie later recounted to me that it was amazing how these two had gotten to know each other so well over the course of just a few days. She said, regrettably though, she never found out his full name, where he lived, things like that. The next day, even more snow had fallen. It seemed to be getting colder and colder. Annie at this point actually thought they might be lost, but again, she didn't want to say anything to Andrew. That night, to the surprise and amazement to both of them, they saw that same white spherical type object with the tail fly right over their campsite. Annie said that Andrew at this point was convinced that this was some kind of a UFO that was actually maybe following them. Annie described it as flying over their campsite and then jetting off into the sky like a bullet. Even though they both thought this was incredible, tried to photograph it as best they could, it was at this point where they both agreed that they needed to turn around or find a trail that led out of the forest. The next day, they had gotten up. Andrew told Annie that he was pretty sure he knew where there was an exit trail. He told her to stay by the fire and camp. He told her if he did in fact find the exit trail that he would come back for her and then they could both hike out together. After waiting for over an hour with the sun fully up, Andrew still had not returned. She decided to follow his trail out. She noticed that he had gone one direction, then turned around, and then made a right-hand turn. She followed those footprints, which led to a clearing. The footprints led past these reeds, then they just disappeared. It was like he was either picked up by something or vanished into thin air. She just could not figure it out. She went over the track several times. She went back and forth. She knew that there were no other hikers around. She knew that these were Andrew's boot marks. Annie said she spent hours trying to figure out what could have happened to him. She then decided to go back to the campsite that they had been staying at the night before. She built a campfire and just waited. She didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, all she could think to do was to go back to the trail that she followed the day before, which she did. Still no sign of Andrew. She just decided that she was going to try and find her way out herself and then come back with help. At the same time, she thought that Andrew was a very experienced hiker and maybe he just decided to go off on his own. She would have found that surprising. She just didn't know what to do. She finally found the trail with the lean-to that she knew she was going the right way. She was able to finally navigate her way out of the Appalachian Trail. She immediately told her ranger friend that had lent her the camera what had happened, the whole story. The friend told her, definitely don't tell our boss about this. Don't say anything about the UFO stuff. If he is missing, his family will report him missing or someone that knows him better. You said that you gave him her card, which Anie had given him one of her new business cards, so she was hoping that Andrew would get in touch. Anie went out when she had more gear the next couple of days looking for Andrew. She was unable to find him. She continued to monitor the stations everywhere. There was never any missing report for anybody by that name or in that age group. Unfortunately, Anie had no possible way of contacting Andrew. She didn't even know his last name. She said it was heartbreaking to her, and she always thought of their time together. Every time she saw footprints, she said that it reminded her of Andrew, and she just hoped and prayed that he was out alive and having a good life. Anie had seen one of my videos about a hiker on the Pacific Crest Trail that helped me after I was injured in an earthquake. She had asked me to make this video, the original one that I made. She wanted to hopefully see if Andrew was out there and possibly would see this and get in touch with me. I told her of course I would, but we both really didn't expect anything, and sadly, like I said earlier, she passed away earlier this year. But Andrew Stitch actually saw the video and got in touch with me. Now you may be thinking, oh, it's maybe somebody just making it up. On the contrary, Anie told me something that only Andrew would know, and I conveniently left out of the first video. It just so happens that he also works search and rescue, so the odds of this all coming together are just unbelievable. He said that it was amazing because he's only recently found my channel, and when he was watching the video, he said to himself, that can't be me. He can't be talking about me. He said he watched it a couple times over. He just couldn't believe it. And of course, he knew about the peace ring, which he was wearing at that time, which Anie told me about, which I did not tell you guys about in the last video. Andrew told me his story about what happened that day. He had gotten up to look for the trail, as he said. He didn't quite understand why Anie couldn't follow his footprints, but he said that it was probably because at one point he did go off to follow what he thought were bear tracks. He thought that this was possibly a bear getting ready for hibernation. He was scared that they would run into it, but unfortunately, while he was doing this, he got himself turned around and was lost for, he said that he thought it was 3 days, but he can't really remember. He knows that it was at least 2 nights. He said that he eventually just arbitrarily found this other trail that led him out of the forest. When he got back into town, he had lost Annie's card. All his gear was wet. He had lost a lot of his gear as well. He was worried about Anie, but he knew that she worked for the Parks Department or the Forest Service. He couldn't remember which one. He was pretty sure it was the Parks Department. He felt awful that they had gotten separated, but he was confident that she would be able to find her way out. To his credit, he also said that he contacted a bunch of different agencies, but he didn't really know what state she was going to be working in. Like Anie said, they never went into specifics of those type of things. Andrew had moved out to California a couple months after this whole incident. He's been out west ever since. I unfortunately had to give him the bad news that Anie passed away from cancer. However, I did tell him that she would be thrilled that he is okay. That's all she was worried about. She kept telling me, if you do find him, tell him how much she appreciated their time together, how she would never forget the UFO, which he also said was, to date, the most incredible thing he's ever seen in the night sky. He seems like a very nice guy. He's doing very well. Works search and rescue, which of course I think is awesome. I just wish I could have found him sooner. Anie would have been so happy. It is amazing, this whole series of events, and even how they came to be on the trail at the same time in the first place. Like I said, I'll have a link to the full video in the description if you want to watch that. I want to dedicate this to my dear friend Anie, also to say thank you to Andrew. My thoughts and prayers are with both of you, your loved ones. Thank you, Anie, for your service to the parks and outdoors. Thank you for sharing this amazing story with me and allowing me to share it with everyone else. And I'm so grateful that I was able to find Andrew. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for all your support, your comments, your feedback. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. Definitely leave me a comment. I love hearing from you all. Special thank you to co.ag for providing the background music. Hopefully I'll see you all in the next one. Take care. Hey everyone, thanks for sticking with me to the end. I really appreciate it. Like I said, I really appreciate all your support, your comments, your feedback. If you have any case or video suggestions, please leave me a comment or you can email me. My next video is going to be about several missing hikers that disappeared in the same area of the Pacific Northwest. Please stay tuned for that. If you'd like to be entered into the holiday advent calendar giveaway, all you have to do is leave me a comment with your feedback and just let me know you want to be entered into the giveaway. All right, everyone. Thank you again. Have a wonderful week. See you in the next one.